So today, we're going to dive into a classic and really powerful critique of central planning, drawing from the ideas you'll find in A World Become One. And it all boils down to one fundamental question. Is it even possible to manage an entire economy from the top down? All right, here's our game plan. We're going to kick things off with what's called the planner's dilemma, basically an impossible job. Then we'll get into the two massive economic hurdles, the calculation problem and the knowledge problem. After that, we'll see how prices act like this incredible hidden information network. And then we'll look at the real-world consequences of this kind of control, and wrap up with a pretty grim theory on why the worst people often end up in charge. Okay, let's jump right into the planner's dilemma. And to really wrap our heads around just how staggering the job of a central planner would be, we're going to put you, right in the driver's seat. No, really, take a second and picture it. You are in charge of everything, the whole global economy. And bam, a catastrophic drought hits the Northern Hemisphere. All of your farm managers are calling, desperate for water. But so are the cities, so are the factories. There is not enough water to go around. The decision falls to you and you alone. So, what's the right move? Where do you even start? Just think about the sheer number of variables for a second. We're talking millions of farms, countless ways to transport water, endless methods for conservation. I mean, the number of possible solutions, it isn't in the thousands or even the billions. The source calculates it in the quadrillions, with a Q. Faced with a number that big, how could any single person or even a whole committee of geniuses possibly figure out the one single best option? And that impossible choice? It leads us directly to the first gigantic hurdle, what the economist Ludwig von Mises called the calculation problem. He said trying to plan an economy this way was like trying to pilot a massive ship with no rudder. You're just drifting. So here's the core of it. Mises argued that without market prices for the basic building blocks of an economy, things like steel, land, and labor, a planner has no way to measure value. You can't calculate profit and loss. So is building a tractor factory a better use of steel than building a new bridge? Without prices, you have absolutely no rational way to know. You're just taking a shot in the dark. Let's bring this right back to our drought. In your planned economy, you, the planner, have to guess who needs the water most. But in a market economy, something else happens. The price of water just goes up. And that higher price, that's a signal. Farmers see that signal and maybe they invest in more efficient irrigation. Cities see it and start conservation programs. The price coordinates everybody's actions, automatically, without a single command from the top. And Mises himself put it this way. Without that constant, real-time feedback of profit and loss that you get from prices, the planner is completely lost. They're flying blind. There's just no way to know if you're wasting resources, if a factory is inefficient, or if you're even making things people actually want. You have no bearings. But it gets even trickier. Building on Mises's idea, his student F.A. Hayek came up with what he called the knowledge problem. And this adds a whole new and maybe even more difficult layer to the challenge. Hayek's brilliant insight was that the most important economic information isn't the kind of stuff you can collect in a report and hand to a planner. No, he said it's this huge, messy, unorganized body of knowledge, the knowledge of particular circumstances of time and place. It's local, it's specific, and it changes by the minute. So what kind of knowledge are we talking about here? Well, it's the farmer who just knows the soil on his little patch of land. It's the shipping agent who happens to spot a cargo ship that's only half full. It's the factory manager on the ground who notices one of her machines is sitting idle. Hayek's whole point is that this crucial knowledge is scattered among millions of different people, and it's literally impossible to gather it all up in one central brain. So, if a central planner can't possibly know all these little things, how on earth does a market economy manage to coordinate the actions of billions of people? Well, the source argues the secret is the price system. It acts like this amazing, spontaneous global information network. Hayek explained this with a simple but powerful story about tin. Let's say a tin mine shuts down somewhere in the world. Now, if you're a guy who makes tin cans, you don't need to know where the mine was or why it closed or anything about it. All you need to know is one thing: the price of tin just went up. And that single piece of information is enough. You automatically start to use less tin, maybe you switch to aluminum, and that change ripples out to the aluminum market, and so on and so on. That one price signal coordinates a massive global response. And here's the amazing part. Almost nobody involved knows the original reason why. And you can actually see this in action every time you go to the grocery store. Ever picked up a bag of chips or something and seen a super vague ingredient list like this? Contains one or more of the following oils. It kind of looks like the company can't make up its mind.
But of course, they know exactly what's in every bag. That vague list is just them responding to price signals. See, they have a list of oils that all work perfectly fine in their recipe. So for each new batch, they simply check the market and buy whichever one is the cheapest that day. And by doing that, they're unintentionally helping to make sure that these oils are used efficiently across the entire global economy. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Okay, so that's the theory, which is fascinating stuff. But what happens when this kind of thinking hits the real world? Let's take a look at the very real consequences that the source argues come from trying to impose this kind of large-scale central control.
Now, here's where the source makes a really interesting and maybe even controversial claim. It argues that the big societies we usually call socialist, like the old Soviet Union, were never truly and fully centrally planned. Why? Because a complete 100% implementation of that plan, they argue, would have collapsed into total economic chaos almost immediately.
And get this, it turns out they had a surprising dependency. Soviet planners didn't just make up numbers in a vacuum. They famously and secretly relied on commodity prices from Western markets, literally looking at things like the Wall Street Journal to help them make their own 5-year plans. There was even a famous dark joke among Soviet officials that the whole world should go socialist, except for one small country, like New Zealand, so they'd still have someone to get the real prices from.
But the consequences, oh man, they go way beyond just economics. When the state controls every factory, every farm, every office, it becomes the one and only employer. Think about the immense power that concentrates in one place. The source points to the fictional surgeon in Milan Kundera's novel, who, after speaking his mind, gets reassigned to be a window washer. If you upset your one and only possible boss, there's literally nowhere else for you to go. And that leads to a really difficult question. If so many supporters of central planning are genuinely good people with noble intentions, why do these systems so often seem to end in oppression? Well, Hayek had a chilling theory for this, which he called the rule of the worst. The source lays out this grim but logical path. So, step 1, a giant national plan, requires everyone to be on the same page, to have one single will. But step 2, people are people, and they're gonna disagree. So, step 3, what happens when, say, the coal miners go on strike over their wages? The whole plan grinds to a halt. And that leads to step 4, a terrible choice. Does society abandon the grand plan entirely, or does it find a strong leader who is ruthless enough to force it through?
And this is Hayek's absolutely chilling conclusion. To make the plan work, a leader will inevitably have to choose between failure and disregarding what he calls ordinary morals. The very actions needed to enforce the plan, coercion, intimidation, violence, are things that decent, kind people are simply unwilling to do. So the people who are most willing to be brutal, they're the ones who rise to the top and manage to stay there.
At the end of the day, the source argues this whole thing stems from a fundamental clash between two very different ideas of equality. On one side, you've got equality before the law, where the rules are the same for everybody. Now, because we're all different, that naturally leads to different outcomes in life. But on the other side, you have the goal of material equality, forcing everyone to have the same outcome. And to do that, the source argues, you have no choice but to start treating people unequally. And all of this brings us back to the huge, central question at the heart of this entire critique. A central plan, by its very nature, demands a single, unified will for all of society. But a free society is built on the exact opposite idea, that it's made up of millions of unique individuals, each with their own will. So the question this leaves us with is a big one. Can those two things ever truly coexist?